Good evening to everyone who's joined us for this evening's public open house, either directly here on Zoom or watching via the YouTube live stream, which I believe is now live. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to join us. We'll give everyone about a minute or two here to get connected and settled in before we jump into this evening's public open house. Thank you so much.
Hello, everybody. We're at 6 o'clock now, and respecting everybody's time, we'll get the meeting started now. So my name's Chris Miller. I'm project manager at the town, neighborhood planner, senior neighborhood planner with the town. And I guess before I turn it over to WSP, I just want to thank everybody for their interest, participating, whether you've registered to speak or have skipped over to the live stream on YouTube. If that's your intention, is just to listen into the meeting, YouTube is available for you. You can pause and go away and get a drink and come back, as opposed to the Zoom platform. But again, thanks. I do know that we have Mayor Redekop, who's joined us, and I believe Councillor Tom Lewis is also listening in on this meeting as well. But I think, for the time being, I'd just like to turn it over to the consultants who will lead the meeting. And on that note, I'll step back and turn it over to, I guess, Greg.
Thanks, Chris, and good evening, everyone. I'm Greg Bender from WSP. We've been retained on behalf of the town to work with the town and residents and stakeholders on a short-term rental land use study. And perhaps I'll turn it over to Matt just to walk through some of the housekeeping items, and then we'll go into the presentation.
Thanks, Greg, and good evening, everyone, and thanks for taking the time out of your evening to join us. I'm Matt Rodriguez, and I'm with WSP as well, and I'll be facilitating this evening's session once we get to the Q&A portion, and certainly want to leave lots of opportunity for that conversation. So just a few notes on housekeeping and how this evening may unfold. Those who are in attendance this evening are on mute and in the webinar function. And once we get through the presentation, we'll have a Q&A. And so we do invite you to raise your hand if you'd like to speak, and then we'll call on you and invite you to join as a speaker once we get to your question. And so certainly will be an opportunity to speak once we get to the discussion portion of the evening. We are, as you may know, and you may be joining us from the YouTube platform. This is being streamed live to YouTube and will be recorded for future viewing. And so if there is something you missed, or a neighbor or a friend that wants to get up to speed, certainly will be another opportunity to view this presentation and the discussion that we have this evening. We do have about 30 attendees this evening here on the Zoom webinar, and certainly others joining us via YouTube. And so we do ask that you keep your comments brief to allow others a chance to speak. And so we'll certainly be doing our best to work through as many of the live sort of spoken questions as possible. But there is also an opportunity to type your question or comment in the Q&A box. And so certainly if you prefer that option over speaking, you're welcome to use that, and we'll try and get through again as many questions there as well. If we get to the end of our public open house, and being mindful of everyone's time and busy schedules, we'll be taking all questions that are written in the chat box, or the Q&A tool rather, and we can follow up afterwards and then provide a bit of a summary. So recognizing that we have a number of people attending today, we may ask you to sort of keep it to one question and maybe one follow-up. But if you would like to continue that conversation, we do ask you can follow up directly with the town after this evening's public open house. So with that, just a bit of housekeeping. You're welcome to raise your hand at any point during this evening's meeting, but we will get to it at the end. Likewise, with the question and answer tool, you can type your question in as we go. So if you have a burning question that comes up, you can type that in, and we'll look to get to those after the presentation. So I think that's it for housekeeping items, and I will pass the floor back to Greg and William.
Thanks, Matt. So we've gone through housekeeping. We'll talk to you a bit about who we are, talk about why we're here this evening, the timeline of the project, a bit of context around what's happened in the past and what we're building on as part of this program. I'll give you some context as to what us as land use planners have been retained to do and sort of what our guidance is. A bit of a jurisdictional scan, sort of best practices, what other municipalities have been doing, what they found as part of in most assignment. We actually look about what other municipalities are doing and then determine if that's locally appropriate or appropriate for the municipality that we're working with, and then apply that locally based approach. And then a discussion. Again, if you can advance the slide, well, really what we want to talk about tonight is we're here to listen. We're here to listen. We're here to get feedback on any concerns that you have, but really we're building on a land use assignment and then provide land use recommendations. As I mentioned at the outset, I'm Greg Bender. I'm the project manager for this particular project. And Will Turman and Matt Rodriguez, we're all from WSP, professional services firm. We're all planners and have been retained by the town to work on this particular land use study related to short-term rentals. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, we've been retained to really look at determining a land use approach for short-term rentals, really looking at the town's official plan, zoning bylaw. We'll talk to you about that just in case you're unaware of what those two documents are and sort of what their sort of alignment is with this particular assignment and what we've been retained to do. But really looking at where in the town short-term rentals should be permitted or not. And perhaps some of the land use sort of regulations that could be potentially applied around certain short-term rentals in terms of any separation distances and density required. So are there too many in a particular area? Should there be more, hypothetically? But as I mentioned, we're here to listen. We're here to talk. We're not here to debate about anything. We're just here to listen so we can take feedback and then consider all that feedback into some options that we might want to consider, and then talk to you a bit more about that. That'll address in a future slide. So as I mentioned, we're here to develop and assess a land use approach for short-term rentals, really through potential changes to the official plan and zoning bylaw, so the planning documents that guide land use in the town. Currently within the town, as I'm sure you're all aware, short-term rentals are regulated through a licensing bylaw. We're not here to talk about the licensing bylaw. We understand that is in effect. We're here to talk about land use regulations. And as you're aware, the town has placed a moratorium on issuing new licenses until this particular project has been completed, and potential amendments could be implemented into the official plan and zoning bylaw. We are here to, again, talk about the land use approach, and should the input be provided tonight, we can consider that through options, and then final recommendations, which will be considered by council. And then enacted through changes to the official plan and zoning bylaw, should that be the direction that we move forward with. So as I mentioned, the purpose of this open house is to talk about short-term rentals as it relates to the land use implications. We need to understand from you, are they in the appropriate areas? Do they need to be in different areas? Are there too many in certain areas? Or are there even areas where short-term rentals should not be permitted? And then really, we need to understand sort of potential land use solutions to address those particular issues. So if there are too many in certain areas, potential land use solutions could be to have separation distances or only allow a certain number in a particular area. Again, we need to sort of paint a full picture as to what some of the issues are, so we can try and address those through potential solutions. Next slide, please. So the overall project timeline is really to be completed in spring of 2023. We started this in the fall with stakeholder meetings that included business community, internal staff at the town, a community focus group, individual meetings with council. And certainly this particular open house that we're here tonight, we want to hear from you. We're information gathering point in the project. So we're just here to listen and to get as much feedback as we possibly can get. We're going to summarize this, as Matt mentioned, in an exercise called a consultation report and a background summary. So what we're aiming to do is take all the feedback, summarize that in the report, and then use that to build on options, which is part of the next phase. That's going to be completed through winter 2022-2023. Those will include additional workshops, both with staff, the community focus group. Again, we're going to come back through an open house and look for feedback on some of the options that we're identifying, and then include all that in an options report. Again, including the feedback that we've received, and then build on that through the next phase in terms of developing land use recommendations. We keep emphasizing land use recommendations because, again, we're not talking about changing the licensing framework. We're just looking to identify what are some of the land use regulations that we might want to include for additional guidance on short-term rentals. So as part of the work we're going to be completing in winter 2023, which will include draft recommendations, another public open house. So again, provided you all stick along through the whole process, we'll certainly have opportunities to share the various work that we've done and get feedback from all of you on that. Even if you don't have an opportunity to attend the public open house, there are certainly open opportunities to provide your input through the town's project website. So what we're going to do is, again, we're going to develop recommendations, have an open house, then we're going to identify any potential changes through a final report and then present that to council for consideration. Should council endorse the recommendations or perhaps advise on potential changes to recommendations, once that's been finalized, we'll then move forward into a formal amendment process, which would include preparing formal amendments to the town's official plan and zoning bylaw, should that be the direction we move. Have another open house, have a statutory public meeting, take all the feedback and evaluate through a comments response matrix, identify how certain what changes have been made based on that feedback, identify that in a report, and then have that presented to council for review and approval, should that be the direction, or should that they want to endorse that at that time. So with that, we'll move into a bit of a contextual background for the work that's been completed to date, and talk to you a bit about the assignment that we're here to talk to you about tonight.
Thank you, Greg. So here I have a slide to kind of give a bit of context on where short-term rentals are located in the town and kind of understand what it is that is happening in Fort Erie. So this is information from AirDNA, which is a website that compiles information from Airbnb and Vrbo, which are both services that are used to let STRs. And as of November, there have been 236 active listings on AirDNA. And what that means is that there's 236 different STRs that have been available for at least one day in the past month. And it's not immediately evident based on this map, but this amount fluctuates throughout the year. So the graph that's shown there shows the number of active listings that are available for at least one day in a quarter. It fluctuates throughout the season, so that there's far fewer, probably as low as 150 in the winter, but a lot more during the summer. And many of these listings, if you were to look closely at them, they are only available for 160 days or less. And in fact, one of them that I've seen is only available for one day of the whole entire year of the past 12 months. So with that said, currently of the current active listings, there's a very strong concentration around Crystal Beach, and some others in Ridgeway, and a few others all around the Lakeshore and Niagara River areas. And in response to STRs in the town, in June 2019, town staff initiated a program to regulate STRs through the licensing pilot study to start the process of regulating them and understanding how the licensing program would work. That program ran from June 2020 until October 2022, giving several seasons of information to understand. And the way that this study operated, the parameters of the study were that it included an open-ended public survey to understand how people were experiencing the licensing program, monitoring the uptake of the licensing program compared to the active STR listings, and monitoring enforcement statistics. So communicating how complaints were handled, what types of complaints were there, and how many times STR licenses faced penalties. And the current licensing statistics from 2022, there are currently 184 licenses, which is actually a decrease from last year, which was 215. But that may also be influenced by the current moratorium on issuing new licenses. 94% of these licenses are owned by individuals, and a very small portion are owned by corporations. And like we've seen in the map on the previous slide, the location of STRs, the majority, 73% of these licensed STRs are in Crystal Beach, with smaller portions in Ridgeway and the rest of Fort Erie. And then understanding the major land use planning documents, the regulations and policies that kind of determine how land uses are done in Fort Erie. There are two documents, the official plan and the zoning bylaw. And the official plan is a long-range planning document that guides the use of land through designations and policy. It's very overarching, visioning, objective-based, and it applies to the whole town. It also provides guiding principles, and it's kind of provides overarching policy direction rather than specifics. The official plan must be consistent with other legislation from the province and provincial policy statement, and it has to conform as well with the regional official plan from Niagara. So the official plan has to follow many other policy documents that we're also taking into account in this study. And the official plan should provide enabling policy guidance for land uses specifically, including STR. So it needs to give a bit of direction on how STRs should be operating in the town. And on the right, you can see an extract from the schedule of land uses that shows the designations that are applied throughout the town of Fort Erie and the types of designations that are there. So we've got commercial, core mixed use, rural or residential designations. In addition to the official plan, the town has a zoning bylaw, which is the implementing document for the official plan, and it provides specific regulations and permissions on a property-specific basis. It provides specific land use regulations, and the zones provide direction on where those regulations apply, and it implements the official plan. It also contains definitions for specific uses and is very clear and specific in the way that it deals with different types of land uses and how they're regulated. As I said, the zoning bylaw must conform to the official plan, and it should provide detailed regulations for STRs, including definitions and how they may be regulated. So if there's going to be a definition for an STR, it's very likely going to be in the zoning bylaw. Some examples of the types of standards and regulations that you would find commonly in a zoning bylaw are setbacks, building setbacks from property lines, the minimum or maximum size of a use, minimum or maximum density of a use or jobs or dwellings per hectare. Permitted uses are very common, and that can include types of dwellings. And parking requirements are also very common in zoning bylaws. So understanding how land use regulations can be implemented or done in the town of Fort Erie, it's really helpful to look at other municipalities that are comparable and see how they address the regulations of STRs. And we have 3 different examples here: the town of Niagara on the Lake, the town of the Blue Mountains, and Prince Edward County. And they all provide roughly a bit different approaches from each other on how to regulate STRs. So the first example is Niagara on the Lake, and they have 3 different categories of how they manage short-term rentals. The first is a villa, which is a bit larger. It has more bedrooms, and it has almost no upper limit on number of rooms except in agricultural areas. A cottage rental is limited to 3 bedrooms maximum, and it's a single detached dwelling. And a vacation apartment is above a business in a commercial zone. Niagara on the Lake considers STRs a commercial use, and they permit them in residential zones broadly. However, the vacation apartments are limited to locations above a business in commercially owned property downtown. So those ones are located in commercial areas explicitly. There is a density requirement of 1 STR per lot, and these STRs are subject to landscaping requirements. So setbacks from property lines and landscaping such as hedges might be something that would be a landscape separation requirement. And that would be based on the individual zone that it's located in. There is some parking requirements of at least 1 per room per villa and 2 per cottage rental. And they are not required to have the owner occupying the unit. However, the owner or property manager must be available on site within 45 minutes. The second example is the town of Blue Mountains, and they also have several different categories. They have 4 different categories. Type A is permitted exclusively within a specific exception area of the town. Type B is permitted in all areas of the town of the Blue Mountains, and type C is an STR that has been grandfathered in. So it was permitted before these regulations were implemented. Type D is a bed and breakfast short-term rental. The official plan and zoning bylaw considers STRs a commercial use, and they are prohibited within single detached residential neighborhoods. Type A STRs, which are permitted within a special exception area, they are permitted only in that one exception area, and they are exempt in that area from maximum occupancy and density requirements. So they can have more bedrooms, they can be much closer together to each other than other STRs. There are density requirements that limit how many STRs can be located in a certain area, which is a minimum separation distance. So no more, an STR can't be located closer to another STR than 120 meters. They also do not have a requirement for the owner to be an occupant of the dwelling. However, an owner or responsible person must be available within 30 minutes. So again, like Niagara on the Lake, someone has to be available, likely local, to be able to respond to complaints and be on site. So here you can just see a map of the exception area where there's more, it's more permissive of STRs. And where they can be larger and closer together. So it's a relatively confined area. And it's pretty close to where the resorts and the ski slopes are. The last example we have is Prince Edward County. And they have, like Niagara on the Lake, they have 3 different STR categories, but instead of being classified based on how many bedrooms or how it's located, it's based on residency. So the first category is primary residence STA. And a quick note, they use a different language. It's the same thing. So the STA stands for short-term accommodations, which is the same way of saying short-term rental accommodation. It's still referring to Airbnbs. So the primary residence STA It requires that the owner that's their primary residence, and they can rent out a portion of that. They have to be on site year round, and they are permitted to host someone in their primary residence while they are not on site for up to 45 days a year. So if they want to go on a trip for a month, they can rent out the unit as long as they're there for the majority of the year. And then the secondary residence STA, this is an older short-term rental that was licensed before these changes were made, and they are no longer permitting new secondary residence STAs. So these are short-term rentals where the owner is not, that's not their primary residence. And then the third type is a bed and breakfast. So in their zoning and official plan, they don't specifically describe short-term rentals as a commercial use. However, they are encouraged in commercial zones. And they are located in a range of residential, commercial, and rural zones, which aligns roughly with the way that they consider it as a primary residence STA, which is the form of short-term rental that they are encouraging. For primary residence STAs, there is no requirements for density or proximity. However, for the other categories of short-term accommodation, short-term rentals, there's a max density of 15% of existing dwellings within a specific radius, depending on the zone. There are parking requirements, which are 1 space per guest room or half a space per guest. And there is a requirement for all new STAs to be owner occupied. And regardless, someone who is responsible must be available on site within 60 minutes. This slide is to just give a bit of a demonstration or a visual representation of what the residential density requirements are for the short-term accommodations. So in that first example, in a residential zone, 15% of existing dwelling units within 100 meters are permitted to be short-term accommodations. So that might be a town block or a street. So no more than 15% of dwellings can be short-term accommodations in that space. For hamlet residential zones, the radius is a bit larger. It's 220 meters, which would cover roughly the hamlet. And in other eligible zones, like rural areas, that radius is extended to 500 meters. So with that, I'm going to give the mic back to Matt, who will kind of refresh the housekeeping on how the discussion is, and we'll move on to providing a bit more feedback. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Will, and thanks again to everyone who's joined us for this public open house. So the presentation sort of set the stage for the type of discussion that we're having tonight, and certainly want to hear your feedback on this land use study. And so we have a couple questions that had already come in to the Q&A tool, which is fantastic. And so just a refresher for those who may have just joined or are joining via the YouTube live stream. If you are in the Zoom webinar today, you are on mute. And so if you would like to speak, please feel free to raise your hand. And we'll call on you in the order that you come in, and we can bring you in to speak and ask your question. We do have about 35 people now in attending right in the webinar itself. And so we would ask that you keep your comments brief to allow everyone a chance to speak. But rest assured, if we can't get to your question this evening, feel free to type it in the Q&A tool, and we'll do our best to respond subsequent to this public open house. Again, a reminder to everyone, it is being live streamed publicly on YouTube, and a recording will be made available on the project website afterwards. We'll also be posting a copy of the slide deck on the website after. So again, if there's something you missed or want to share it with someone else, you'll certainly be able to do that as well. If you aren't in the speaking mood this evening, no worries. Feel free to use the Q&A tool to type your question, and we'll be we can either type a response if we can do that, or we can address it live. And so again, yeah, we will be posting this presentation, posting a recording, and certainly I think I just saw a question come in about staying in touch after this and sharing future reports. Certainly anyone who registers for this webinar webinar will be kept reprised as the project evolves. So certainly lots more to come as Greg walked through the timeline. So with that, I will go to the Q&A and to Greg and Will. Would you be able to sort of speak to the classification of SD as a commercial operation and sort of how it squares with being permitted in a residential area?
Thanks, Matt. And perhaps we could perhaps flash some of the questions that we're aiming to perhaps get some answers to as I respond to that. So as I mentioned at the outset, we're here to listen. In some municipalities, permitting short-term rentals in residential neighborhoods is something that they were considering and have permitted. And others, it's something that the municipality felt that perhaps is not the direction they wanted to proceed. We're not suggesting we lean either way. We're here just to listen and to understand some of the concerns that each individual has with respect to STRs or not. We're also here to listen about how perhaps short-term rentals contribute to and fill a gap in municipalities where there aren't a lot of places to stay, perhaps. So we're here to listen to both sides and try to provide a balanced solution to short-term rentals in the town. So Matt, I'll continue to ask some of these questions, and if there's other questions that come up through the Q&A, just let us know. But the kinds of things, as I mentioned at the outset, what we want to understand is, as a resident, or what conflicts would you like to see mitigated or eliminated as a result of land use regulation? So what is that? What are we asking there? We want to understand is, hypothetically, if there are impacts from short-term rentals that you've experienced or seen, how can we address that? So hypothetically, if there have been parking issues, with respect to too many cars parked somewhere, should we be looking at additional parking regulations? Have you experienced perhaps noise issues, or we'll call them property standards? So perhaps properties that haven't been kept up. What sort of things should we be looking at in terms of perhaps enforcing more some of the property standards or noise bylaws, things of that sort? Perhaps, are there too many, as I mentioned, in a particular area that we need to look at? The other kinds of things that we're looking at is, even as a short-term rental host or guest, what other regulations, could meet your needs while minimizing conflicts that have been raised? So, as I mentioned, some of the, what other regulations could we be putting in terms of allowing perhaps more flexibility on? Will talked about having short-term rentals as in certain areas as owner-occupied, so only allowing owner-occupied units in certain areas. Is that something that could be explored a little bit further? And again, in terms of looking to regulate short-term rentals through the official plan, through the zoning bylaw, what other elements or approaches would you like to see us consider in the next phase? So what criteria should we be using to evaluate options? Should we be looking at more flexibility in areas where there's less pressure, more controls in certain areas versus others where there perhaps is a certainly legacy or a historic cottage rental, I won't say program, but a number of cottage rentals in the area. I think we all recognize what Crystal Beach has been for a very long time, and understanding, should there be more flexibility in that area versus, perhaps others. And that's the kind of things that we're looking to listen to about your experiences and what we can consider as part of the next phases.
So lots of great questions coming in. And Greg, was there anything you wanted to add on that first one about commercial operations being permitted in a residential area, or did you? You good on that one?
I don't want to necessarily bias the discussion, because we want to understand what perhaps there are issues around having a short-term rental in a residential area.
Great. All right. So let me go to, and lots of great feedback and comments here. And again, everything that is typed into the Q&A will sort of form part of the project record, and we'll be summarizing all the feedback received. Would you be able to clarify? So there was some, thanks for providing that chronology of events and sort of how the conversation has evolved here in Fort Erie. Would you be able to clarify what what is meant by a pilot program, and there's some understanding of related to licensing, but what exactly is the pilot program in this context?
and certainly if there's someone from the town that wants to perhaps improve my response, I would encourage you to do so. But we weren't involved in the pilot program, but the pilot program was established to really understand, what was going on in the town as it relates to short-term rentals, to sort of feed into a licensing program. From what I understand, based on what we've heard, is that prior to a licensing program, it was a bit of the wild west. Not a lot of control in the town, and from what I understand, there were a number of complaints related to short-term rentals. But since the licensing program was put into place, those complaints and those issues have drastically reduced. They haven't gone away, of course, but they have reduced. And I believe that pilot program was really to evaluate, the number of licenses, to try and inform some of the licensing programming that the town was looking to refresh. And perhaps if I've responded incorrectly to that, I'm asking for some correction by the town.
Thanks, Greg. No, I think generally that's it. There wasn't anything in place. We needed to put something in place because of the amount of interest that was being generated, the amount of concern, and so having nothing to going to having something because of the interest of the residents and the amount of interest that was being generated, and so we needed to have an approach. So it's basically three-pronged, where we're dealing with an enforcement matter, we're dealing with a licensing matter, and now we're trying to deal with this last piece of the puzzle, which is essentially the land use piece. So once we have this in place, we hope to have our suite of short-term rental policy and regulation that can carry forward. We view our enforcement and licensing as scalable, so they're in a position to grow or contract with demand or need or whatever comes out the other side of recommendations that council may choose to adopt at some point in the future. So this is really the where piece that we're trying to capture.
Great, thank you so much, Greg and Chris. Certainly lots of great questions coming in the Q&A, but I do see Dan, you have your hand up, so I'll give you the chance to hop off mute, and you should be able to do that now.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
All right. So I have a comment and for your consideration, and that's that I believe existing licensed STRs should be grandfathered regardless of what the location is. And I think that because canceling a license will result in some kind of retroactive, punitive financial punishment to those of us who opted in according to the rules, abided by the bylaws, participated in the revamping of the bylaws. And given the current property values have adjusted because of our progress through COVID, market conditions have changed. If we were forced to shut down and we're good operators, we're going to experience some kind of significant financial problem due to the process. What I do believe has happened because of the excellent cooperation between the town and those of us who participated in the revamping of the bylaws recently, is that the bad operators are being weeded out and the good operators are going to remain. And so to summarize, I really do think that by allowing existing licensed short-term rental operators to continue, regardless of how the zoning recommendations hit the ground when the bylaws are revamped, I think that they should be allowed to continue. So that's my comment for tonight. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. Greg, did you want to weigh in on that at all?
Yeah, thanks for the comment, Dan. And just, you might not be asking this, but I feel the need as a planner to talk more about planning. I'm sure nobody else wants to hear about it, but just for context, when we talk about revising the official plan and zoning bylaw, what we actually can't do through those documents is go retroactively, go in reverse, go back in time. It's really just from the day that those documents are approved or enacted that we can apply those regulations. So I just wanted to provide that context that even if we hypothetically changed a bunch of stuff in the official plan or zoning bylaw that said short-term rentals couldn't be permitted in a certain area, you can't go backwards and just say existing ones are gone. What you'd have to do, and I'm not saying the town would, but the town would have to consider changing their licensing regime to consider that, but that's not part of this exercise. So really what we're looking to do through the official plan and zoning bylaw, we wouldn't go back in time to move stuff out of their existing conditions.
So would one of the considerations that goes into your report, could it possibly be that existing operators still could be renewed, because it is possible that the town may make a decision to change the bylaws in the future, and if you don't see that there's a problem for those who are in areas where there's going to be a prohibition, if there's no harm done, and there hasn't been any harm since the beginning of the licensing, or for those of us who were even operating before there was licensing and then went out and got the licenses as soon as it was a requirement to play by the rules, it might help to encourage fairness in the system. And I say economic fairness because I know many of the short-term rental operators, and many are small-time people like us who decided not to put our retirement savings into the stock market and into investments where we have absolutely no control. And so our future is at stake here, and we're playing by the rules and there are no complaints. So I would ask that you consider weighing in with your educated opinion when you write your report. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. And just to directly respond, it is something that can be considered.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dan. Bear with me 1 second. Lots of hands up, so I'll work through those who have their hands up in order. Scott, I see your hand up, and you should be able to raise your hand now, or sorry, unmute yourself now.
Okay, so I think I'm unmuted.
I can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, so I do have a comment. I thought it was interesting that you put up the way that short-term rentals have been addressed by several other municipalities, a couple of which considered short-term rentals to be commercial uses, and I believe there was one that did not consider it such. My opinion would be that renting a room is a commercial enterprise, and renting a car is a commercial enterprise, and renting tools is a commercial enterprise, and renting drones is a commercial enterprise. And any of those rental activities that are commercial ought not to be pursued in residential areas where our zoning is very clear that commercial uses are not permitted in residential areas. So I live a couple kilometers outside of Crystal Beach. The area where I live is very single family residential. There's a commercial establishment half a kilometer one way down the road and two others a kilometer the other way. But I would be distressed if my neighbors began to rent rooms out on a short-term basis. That seems to me to be a commercial use of a residential area that ought to not be permitted. That's my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott, for sharing and for providing that input feedback this evening. I will go next to Amanda, who you should be able to unmute yourself now with your question or comment.
Okay, thank you very much. So in regards to short-term rentals, I think they should be allowed anywhere throughout the town that in terms of where the town foresees tourism opportunities. In terms of near beaches, agritourism, I know that I canter, for example, has recently built a couple of accommodation properties on their property, and they wanted to rent them out, but they couldn't because they're not able to get a license. So in terms of creating different opportunities for agritourism, and also we need to be able to promote local restaurants and areas. We've just looking at revitalizing Bridgeburg. And currently we only have 6 hotels, and 4 of them are near the highway and Peace Bridge, and only 2 are in Crystal Beach. So it's important that we have accommodations to be able to house the people who are coming here. It's also important that a study is done to determine how many rooms or bedrooms would be needed to accommodate all the tourists that we want to encourage to come here. So that's really my opinion in terms of, we don't even know what that number is. I don't believe that there's been an actual study that's been done to determine how many tourists we would like to have here. So in terms of, I don't see the necessity for curtailing it into particular areas. As we can see, it's up, most of them are all along the waterway. And we do have, because we are residents of Fort Erie. We own a property in Fort Erie, and we also manage properties in Fort Erie. And what people don't seem to understand is that they're not just used for vacation rentals. We have people who, we have a property in Crescent Park, and we've had local families use it when they're going through renovations because they want to keep their kids in the same school. So there's all different reasons for a short-term rental, and it's not just for people on vacation. That's it.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Amanda. I really appreciate you sharing. And I see you also left a comment similar in the Q&A. Yeah. So really appreciate you sharing. Okay, next I have with a hand raised is Wayne. So I will. You should be able to speak.
Yep. So am I unmuted now?
Yes.
I just wanted to know whether you've got data from AirDNA with respect to where the 52 short-term license facilities that are operating without a license are located.
I think we actually have a handy map of that. If we're able to share that.
So the map that you showed shows all 236 sites. And that would, and you have the data to indicate where the 52 STRs without a license are located?
So this map is from AirDNA, and it's all of the currently active listings, which have been available for at least 1 day in the past month. That's what this shows.
So you indicated that there were 236 active AirDNA listings, and that we have 184 licenses issued by the municipality, which means there are 52 active listings which aren't licensed. I believe that's what that data would reveal.
Yeah, that's correct, Member Redekop. And just to clarify, the AirDNA does not differentiate between licenses and not. It just provides really a correlation to the publicly available data on Airbnb and Vrbo. I believe, tying this back to the licenses that the town has, I don't think would be a significant exercise. I think that's something that I'm working with the town could do.
Something our staff could easily do if they had the data.
Just to clarify, the typical the way they typically deal with those types of things, they don't reveal the municipal addresses, publicly. So there's a veil of some level of privacy that needs to be tackled in order for us to pinpoint exactly what's what. But
well, those dots must indicate something rather
than general area, like so that it's not a dead pinpoint map for us at this point with this data. But your assessment is correct in the sense that who's advertising, how many, and what we know is to be licensed, so we can go after to try and distinguish what's what.
So I don't want to flog a dead horse here, but somebody marked those dots on that map. And
Yeah,
they
they're-
did that on the basis of what data?
They're drawing data from Airbnb and Vrbo, the sites, and the information that they make available through those sites.
Right. And so that doesn't give specific addresses, but it gives what? A street?
Vicinity, yes, it's close to, and you know, it's. I'm not sure whether or not what our opportunities are to work with those two platforms to gain these specifics, but can look into that most certainly, Mayor.
Okay, thank you. And I'm very appreciative of the comments that are being made because that's very helpful. I would caution the planners though that existing non-conforming use that also has legal aspects to it. So I think we need to bear that in mind as well. Thank you.
All right. So the next question that I have is from Dave McPherson. You should be able to unmute yourself now.
Thanks. I wanted to address the issue.
Dave, we could hear you at the beginning. I don't know if
I have zero interest in having the property adjacent to me grandfathered. And so just to turn this on your first question, what are the conflicts or issues? Last summer, there was a large family rented the house adjacent to it, and two other branches of that family rented two other places in town. 15 to 20 of them congregated for 7 days in a row on the property next to mine. So that was 15 days of unusual noise levels, but only during the day and up to a certain time at night, but certainly disruptive. And so when we really look at this, and while I can appreciate people don't want to take an economic hit, the reality is the quiet enjoyment of my home is impacted for 15 to 16 weeks every year. And I have zero interest in seeing that continue.
Okay, thank you for sharing your comments, Dave, and really appreciate you taking the time to join us. I don't know if your audio cut out or if you had wrapped up. Okay.
I'm good now.
Okay. All right. Sorry, you had cut out at the beginning, so I just wanted to make sure I wasn't cutting you off. The next person I have is Adam. Should be able to unmute yourself now.
Hi, thank you. Yeah. I live beside a short-term rental, and you know, at times it can be challenging, but at the end of the day, like people who purchase these properties and want to operate a short-term rental, they should be allowed to do so. I'm of the opinion that there should be some sort of rules and regulations, but you know, there shouldn't be a cap on the number of short-term rentals. There should be punitive measures that can be taken for people who abuse and don't follow the rules correctly, and you know, have too many people or late night noise and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, as a property owner, you should be able to do what you want with your property, and that's my opinion.
Thanks so much, Adam. And were you the one who asked the question about next steps and timeline, and maybe wondering if Greg and Will could just sort of refresh the group on some of the next steps in the process to resolve the moratorium?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. Would Greg or Will, would you just go over some of the next steps in the process, just for the benefit of those who may have joined perhaps a little bit later?
No problem. Sure. What we can do is just advance to the next step slides, and then we can go back to any of the mapping or any of the questions just for a refresher. So for those who didn't hear part of the presentation, we're actually undertaking this exercise through to winter 2023. We're in the sort of the information gathering phase, preparing a background review report, which is also going to summarize all the input we've received through various meetings, what we've had with other stakeholders, members of council, as well as this open house this evening. We're then going to move forward with considering all the input and then developing options, and options would be then sort of presented to the town, as well as, you know, the community focus group, and then back to an open house again, just to receive input on the options. We're not going to be saying one or the other. It'll just be, here's a bunch of options. Which ones do you think? And then we'll summarize all that and put it into a report, which will then inform the drafting of recommendations, which we'll be looking to complete in the winter 2023. We'll again be back to an open house like this to talk about those recommendations, get input on those, and then present that to council for consideration. And then once we complete that, depending on the recommendations and its acceptance by council, we'll move forward and potentially amend the town's official plan and zoning bylaw to take those recommendations into account. So certainly multiple opportunities to participate. This is really the first public-facing exercise, and then the first open house to gain input on short-term rentals.
Thanks so much, Greg. So I still have a few number of hands up. So Alex B, you should be able to hop off mute and ask your question or share your comment. Alex B, if you're able to, if you're speaking, you're still muted.
There, is that better?
Yes, loud and clear. There you go.
So essentially, I'm just asking for some clarity. It just seems to me in the process of how things have unfolded, it seems clear today that more and more people in town, at the town, and certainly residents, come to define short-term rentals as commercial. So I understand that in 2020 or beforehand, there were lots of short-term rentals arriving, and let's just say uninvited, they showed up anyway. And it just seems to me that as of 2020, when the town felt they had to get it under control, they began this pilot program, and they regulated it with the licensing. And here we are today, and we seem to be talking about going forward to where they should go. And I feel like the discussion should be, why don't we go back to when the town was regulating something that arrived uninvited, that in the official plan, there is clearly no businesses that should operate in residential areas. And it seems to me like the discussion is not about fixing what we did wrong. What we did wrong was to tell them to go away in the first place, not give them licenses to operate. So it's just a different way of looking at this, but I'm asking the question to you as policy writers, how did we get here? In the official plan, they are not meant to mix businesses and residential. So why aren't we correcting the problem instead of going forward and saying, let's find a place for them in residential or anywhere? And grandfathering. There's been a lot of talk about grandfathering. This pilot program, was it not temporary to fix a problem where something arrived uninvited? That is against the official plan as it is today. So I don't know how we got here and why the discussion isn't about let's return back to the official plan and start all over. They don't belong in residential areas.
So that's the nugget we'd take away from there, Alex, is your opinion on that would be that they don't belong in residential areas, right? Currently, the official plan is silent, and and life isn't static. Things are new and they crop up, and at times they need to be addressed through the official plan. So there's amendments to the plan for adding policy to deal with this, and I think that that's the intent here is to it's something we have to deal with it. We need policy around it. We need regulation around it. And we need to find out from the community and council where, best they might want them or not, period. So, it will, at the end of the day, be recommendations advanced to council that they can consider or recuse. But I think that the nugget you came out with at the very end there is that you clearly do not feel they belong in residential areas. And that's really the topic, is land use, and that's what I heard.
Clearly. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Okay, the next person that I have with a hand up is James. James, you should be able to go ahead now and share your question or comment. James, if you're speaking, we can't hear you yet. James, we'll come back to you. I'll go to someone else in the list, and perhaps you're able to connect via microphone. The next person I have is Danny. So, Danny, you should be able to hop off mute and ask your question or share your comment.
Hello, perfect. Yeah, thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. Yeah, interesting conversation, and obviously pros and cons on both sides of the argument. I'm more on the side of short-term rentals being allowed. And, we are really talking about just the 100 days of summer is when this would happen. There aren't too many commercial activities that are possible, likely in that area other than tourism. And why don't we focus on growth and creating opportunities for the youth as well as for the businesses in the area, and find a happy medium, right? It doesn't have to be one way or the other. Grandfathering has been discussed. There are many streets that are 60, 70, 80% short-term rentals now. Why don't we think about extending and finding a middle happy ground where commerce can flourish? And then, Adam had spoken just a few moments ago about regulating the noise and the disturbance. So there is some way of finding balance, I'm sure. Let commerce take its course. I mean, at the end of it, we are a capitalist society, and when we behave as such, put some regulations in, increase the tariffs, increase the fines, but regulate that. So that's my point of view. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing Danny, and for joining us this evening. James, if you're still there and still have a question before we move on to the written questions and comments, are you able to join us? I think we can hear you. Okay, James, we'll come back to you in a little bit if you're still looking to speak. So certainly lots of fantastic comments here coming into the Q&A portal. And as I mentioned at the beginning of our discussion, we'll be taking all of the comments and all of the input received through that tool and downloading it and reporting back on it as the project advances. So really appreciate all those comments. Certainly a lot of reflections on maybe some of the spoken questions that we've received. And so that's really great and really appreciated. This might be a question for, well, I lost it. There's a question, and it might have been on related to an earlier discussion, and then this might be a question for Chris. Has there been any study done about how, tourism or some type of tourism strategy here in the community, and what's and how that's if that type of work has been done to understand sort of the role of short-term accommodations?
Nothing specific that way, like as far as an economic impact on that aspect of that. I think that germane to Fort Erie is the fact that the low rent accommodation for hotel in a tourist area is something that's I guess, clearly evident. And as a tourist area and a seasonal tourist area, that's that the market is you're seeing the amount of people who are advertising, so that they're seemingly a market. And of course, everybody knows it's Crystal Beach, but this is municipal wide. But the Crystal Beach has been historically an area or destination for cottaging. I mean, I look at it as Crystal Beach is similar. Buffalo, a lot of our American friends have the waterfront as their Muskoka kind of thing. Toronto Muskoka relationship. We have a similar feel that goes on with the waterfront, and the Crystal Beach area is evident there. But I think from a study perspective, I'm unaware of anything that's been explicitly done on that context.
Thanks so much, Chris. And certainly lots of comments and questions coming in, and we have almost about 6 people with their hand up, so we are getting through that list. James, were you just one last time? Are you able to join us and hop off mute?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
There you go.
There we go. So yeah, I just the question I had was in the study that they've done, or in the data that you've taken, you say there's 236 rentals, and 184 of those are licensed rentals. Do you know how many of those 184 licensed rentals are only for half the year? Because we see an awful lot of rentals in the area that only goes from so from November to January, they're looking for a longer lease, and then from April or May to October, then they do their short-term rentals. But the only thing I would say about that is a short-term rental that's only for 6 months. It's not bringing any money into the economy for half the year, because they're only bringing it in the summertime when we're fairly busy in this area. So I was just wondering, once they do this study, is there a possibility of looking at a short-term rental as a 12-month venture rather than people who are just doing them for 6 months? So that was my only comment and question.
Thanks, James. And Will, did you want to start with that one?
Yeah, I can respond. Thanks for your question, James. I can't speak directly to the quality of the licensed STRs, but from my looking through what AirDNA has, who has active listings from Airbnb and Vrbo, kind of just perusing through, a lot of them are only rented for 140 days or less. I can't give you very specific numbers, but just in terms of the impression you get when you go through, a lot of them are, especially in Crystal Beach, a lot of them are cottages. They're not available in the winter. And some of them are even rented for 60 days or less. So it would seem that probably half or more are cottage or aren't available during the winter months. Maybe in terms of the licenses, the 184 licenses that are currently issued, maybe Chris would have, or someone from the town would have a better idea of if those licenses are specifically cottages or if they're year-round STRs.
Hi, Will, thanks. No, there is certainly a number of seasonal rentals, only because they're not year-round, capable of year-round occupancy. So some of those, because it is, like we were mentioning earlier, it's a cottage area and has been historically. So I think the notion might be that some of the people who are renting out less are renting out for just to cover some expense and things like that, of maintaining it while perhaps occupying it themselves for a large portion of the summer. But well, that's my I guess that's my comment on that one right now. But nothing further. But it certainly the question is appreciated, James.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, James. I'll go to Tracy H. You've had your hand up for a little bit. You should be able to unmute yourself now.
Thank you. Yeah, my comment is simply to sort of align with what Dave said earlier, is that when you buy a house in a residential area, your expectation is that you are living in a residential area and that you are not living across the street or next door to a hotel. And when you talk about sort of the legality of things, as a residential homeowner, you do not have the right to operate to do whatever you want with your land. I can't open a bar or decide I want to have a grow op or something going on in my backyard. There's a reason why we separate commercial and residential areas. And I think that that is a reasonable thing. If we don't have enough hotels in Fort Erie, maybe that is something we should be considering about versus bringing commercial enterprises into residential areas. And as the mayor said, there are legal implications. You do have the right to quiet enjoyment of your property. And when you start to bring bylaws in that impose upon that, there are legal implications for the town as well, and economic implications for the town. There is no possible way that a short-term rental will bring in the same economic value to the town that a single-family residential home will. That's just the way economics works. It is better for the town to have a residence in a residential area than a short-term rental. They don't bring in the same economic benefits. They just don't. And there are studies to back that up. That's not just a random person telling you that. So if you want to have short-term rentals in the town, they need to be zoned as commercial enterprises, and give unto Caesar what is Caesar. keep residential and commercial enterprises separate, because it seems unfair to both sides.
Thanks so much, Tracy. And that's certainly the working through this land use study of understanding some of the land use control. So really appreciate you sharing your thoughts and feedback on that. Okay, so I got a few more hands, and I'll take a chance to go through lots of great comments coming into the Q&A, and so we'll do our best to walk through a few of those and just sort of give everyone an understanding of what's come in. The next person that I have in queue with her hand up is Rebecca M. If you want to unmute, you should be able to do that now.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Okay, great. And thank you for this forum. I think it's really productive, and I appreciate you allowing us to give you our comments. I agree with Tracy that zoning is critical to keep commercial operations and residential residences completely separate. My family has owned this property for more than 85 years, and we've seen a complete degradation because of the Airbnbs. We have a particular violator down the beach from us who we write on almost a weekly basis to the town to complain about a Airbnb issue. And I'm not seeing any type of enforcement. And I'm wondering if you can provide some data on the enforcement issue, because oftentimes a representative from the town will show up and the owner will suddenly arrive and say, no, it's actually a bed and breakfast. And I know that's a little loophole. And I'm very concerned that things are kind of unraveling quicker than the town is able to even enforce what basically Pandora's box has opened right now. So I'd like to see some data on enforcement. How many people have been fined? How many licenses do you have? How many visits have you made? And I'm also very concerned about the zoning issue. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing your comments on that, Rebecca. And I don't know if Chris is able to weigh in on some of the enforcement piece, but otherwise we can take that away, and certainly want to see that play out here in the land use study.
Yeah, that would be a takeaway for us to look into,
okay.
Like the stats. We're really wanting to focus on the where, and not the enforcement or the licensing pieces, but the where we're looking at right now.
Great, thanks so much, Chris, and thanks so much, Rebecca. The next person that I had with a hand up is Doug S. You should be able to unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you very much. And I too appreciate the effort that you and the town are doing to try to wrestle with this very complicated and emotional issue. Typically when I am looking at complicated issues, I try to sort of pare it down and phrase it in the most simplest of terms to kind of get to the crux of it. And I feel like that's appropriate in this type of forum tonight and where you are in the process. It's been said before, but I just sort of say it again. These dedicated short-term rentals are hotels, and they should be treated as such. Hotel is a commercial enterprise that you would never expect to see in your strictly residential neighborhood. And I understand and appreciate the need for economic development, but and the group that I've been working with, which is a fairly significantly sized group of concerned homeowners here in Fort Erie, have done a tremendous amount of research on the subject. And I would say both regionally and internationally, there's next to no data that short-term rentals provide a positive economic development return to a community that in any way overcomes the negative impacts that they always bring with them. And so I think the ability to sort of segregate these uses into what is already considered a commercial zone, or may be, if the certain neighborhoods are in favor of such a move, be rezoned to accommodate them, then that might be appropriate. And if it does happen, then the town should be able to reap the benefit by being able to tax them as commercial businesses. Right now, us homeowners are subsidizing the cost of regulating these businesses in our backyards, through our own tax dollars. And while I sympathize with the investors and people who have created these businesses in our neighborhoods, and what kind of economic challenges they might have if they have to change gears, what's not being discussed is the negative financial impact these SDRs have on the neighborhoods and the neighbors around them. Nobody wants to live next door to a short-term rental, whether it's well managed or not. It affects the resale values of the houses in close proximity. That's just a well-researched fact. And so I really would like to see the town consider that. What we haven't really focused on is that these licenses were given to businesses that were never defined. There was some discussion in the beginning presentation about defining what a short-term rental is. That step has not been taken. But it's, all you have to do is look at the kind of the Ontario planning boards and the land tribunals and the courts, have upheld that these are commercial businesses, and there are many communities that have taken that to heart and eliminated them from the strictly residential neighborhoods. I agree with what Rebecca and Tracy were saying, that the town would benefit much greater economically by having a full-time resident in these homes that are being taken away as a residential opportunity by short-term rentals. And that's the extent of my comment at the moment. Thank you.
I really appreciate you sharing, Doug, and for joining the open house this evening, and for sharing your comment. So I'll take one more hand here, and then just go over and summarize some of the fantastic comments that we've been getting. We have about 40 people here participating live in the Zoom, and certainly a number more. I don't have that number though in front of me, watching via YouTube. So certainly lots of great input and feedback coming in this evening. The next person with a hand up is Nancy B. And Nancy, you should be able to unmute yourself now.
Thank you very much. And thank you again for doing all this and making this forum possible. And I think it helps all of us to hear everyone's, whether you're for or against, points of view. I'm not going to repeat a lot of the things that I agree with that people have said, but I will say shortly that I do not believe that dedicated short-term rentals belong in residential neighborhoods because they operate as commercial businesses. I did want to address a couple comments that were made by people. One was to express a little bit of empathy for the town enforcement officer, because I do believe that he was trying to get there and trying to do what he's supposed to do, but he was overwhelmed because of the number of complaints that have been made. And I think there was some data from the Niagara Regional Police as well. I seem to recall that being mentioned. And that speaks to the point that enforcement does not work versus zoning. In enforcement, once the issue has taken place, once the noise, once the party next door, whatever it is, it's already ruined the enjoyment by neighboring properties and residents. By the time the enforcement officer gets there, it's often over, and there's nothing you can do about it, and then you have to keep calling and calling and calling. There's no accountability when an owner of a property is not present. And of course, even if, when they do appear, they don't want to impact, they don't want to impact the profitability of their own property by taking any negative action against their renters or speaking against their behavior. I also want to address we're just talking about 100 days of summer here. That's when most residents in this climate that we live in enjoy the outdoors. And we are trying as taxpayers and property owners to enjoy our outdoors as well during the same period. And those two things just don't mix. So thank you very much for offering this opportunity.
No, and thank you for sharing your input and for participating this evening, Nancy. So as I said, I'll take a chance right now just to go through again, lots of great comments, sort of, and some rebuttals, so to speak, of of some of the comments that have been made, and so lots of good discussion here, and some of them which are we've already answered indirectly. So one of the comments was suggesting that through our best practices scan to look at other communities that might be a bit more, tied to the beach or beach oriented, or looking what some other communities are doing. So certainly something that we'll be looking at all the different options of how other communities are tackling the land use issue for short-term rentals. There was a comment here, noting that, looking at the beach, seeing that, again, those short-term rentals are being drawn to the beach and the waterfront areas, and I guess reconciling that of owning a home and living in a beach-oriented community or those beach-oriented areas. I'm just sifting through here. There's some really long, really thoughtful comments here, folks. So thank you for sharing. Comments about sort of the duration of short-term rentals and how long that sort of venture is, and the likes. Again, there's a question here about how we might consider different zones or different types of land uses within Fort Erie, and certainly everything's on the table right now, and we'll certainly take that feedback away in terms of understanding how the land uses within the existing communities in Fort Erie. Lots of great feedback and thoughts on, the notion of grandfathering, and how that process may unfold, and what is considered being grandfathered. So that's some good discussion there. Again, a lot of discussion about the impacts of Airbnbs as commercial enterprises on sort of the day-to-day lives of residents in the neighborhood. Some great feedback on some of the comments that people have been sharing or voicing over the microphone. And so this is a lot of great fodder. And so we may not get to all of this, but there's still certainly a lot more hands and certainly a lot more comments that we'll be going through before we wrap up this evening. So the next hand that I have up is Karen, I believe. And Karen, if you'd like to go ahead, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So I will just say that I agree with a lot of the comments about how the introduction and like growth and explosion of short-term rentals. Basically, the character, integrity, and stability of our neighborhoods are being totally undermined. And, you know, this is like you have a hollowed out neighborhood. People aren't there. They don't really live there. You don't have a neighbor. You can't go and ask to borrow some sugar. It is, to me, you know, the priority of any planning document or official plan is to protect the integrity of neighborhoods and communities first and foremost. And the other comment I have is around the whole notion of, you know, economics or promoting economic development within our town. You know, we have a lot to offer, and people come and they will come. And they just have to be accommodated. They are being accommodated in commercial entities that need to be in commercial zones and not just right next door. My biggest concern, one of my biggest concerns, I've got so many, is that these dedicated short-term rentals, and this is something that I think you should take a look at, of the people who own short-term rentals in our town, how many of those owners live here? They don't even participate in our community. And when they buy a property and turn it into a dedicated short-term rental and just ka-ching, 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 turn it over every week or every weekend, what it does is that house, that home that is converted into a dedicated short-term rental is displacing a family unit. And no one at that address will be getting their car serviced at the local garage, their hair cut at the local barber, or buy paint at the hardware store. No one will be donating to local charities, supporting community programs, or fundraising for our food banks. And they are there 12 months of the year, 365 days a year. And they're not, you know, these people that are here for a week or owners that are coming here from different places, have a primary residence somewhere else, and are just using this area as a way to earn a lot of money at the expense of our community is, to me, very sad. And I don't want to see it continue. That's it for me.
Thanks so much, Karen, for your comments and input for tonight's public open house. Really appreciate it, and for joining the session. So we have one last hand up, and then we'll go back to some of the comments and written input that we've received. And so it's from Renew, I believe. And Renew, you should be able to unmute yourself and speak.
Hi, can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Perfect, thank you. So yeah, just a few comments. Just looking at my notes. So I think one of the comments I wanted to make is that appreciate that, you know, short-term rentals are in residential neighborhoods, but, you know, Airbnb is throughout the world. And as people may know, the homes are in residential communities. And that's why Airbnb is popular as it is, because it allows people an opportunity to stay somewhere that is not a hotel or may have other conveniences. And so with, you know, the Crystal Beach area, I think that as your map shows, that there's quite a few near the beach area, and that is the attraction to the areas, that people want to be by the beach, they want to be near the beach and be able to walk there. And the fact that Crystal Beach doesn't actually have any hotels, but I heard that there is a hotel being considered for development by the lake. So I guess my other question is this why this study is being done? Because they're looking at pushing out short-term rentals and putting a hotel there. The other thing I want to say is just as a short-term rental operator that, you know, we have to go through strict licensing requirements like fire inspections, fire extinguishers, like more things that I would have in my home. I don't have 2 fire extinguishers in my home or on every level. And, you know, we have to follow these strict rules. And this year we paid 4 times the amount for the license than previous years, which is a lot. And me as a, you know, short-term rental operator, I take ownership in my house, and I don't want certain people in my house. I make sure that the people I accept, or, you know, I sort of screen them out, filter them out in different ways. I don't want party people. I don't want people to damage my house because, you know, I don't want to be responsible for that, nor do I want them to be partying and be disruptive to my neighbors as well. So I just want to sort of bring that perspective that, and even this summer, I had 2 weeks where the house wasn't rented only because I declined quite a few people because I just didn't feel comfortable with them. And I just didn't want them in my house. So, you know, I'm willing to take that hit, so to speak, because I just want the right people staying for that time. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Renu, and really appreciate your comments and for joining the public open house this evening. So there are no other hands up to speak, but as I mentioned, certainly lots of great conversation happening in the Q&A and lots of great comments. And so, you know, as I will be taking all and downloading all of this and making this available through future updates and reports. And so I don't know if, you know, Greg or Will, if you had anything you wanted to sort of go through in terms of next steps in the process and the presentation, and I'll just take a minute to look through the Q&A and see if there's some other burning questions that have come up.
Thanks, Matt. Certainly, I'm happy to provide a refresh on our next steps. So as I mentioned before, we are in the information gathering stage of the project, looking to sort of receive all the input that we can, and then summarize that in a background report, which will then sort of inform the development of options as part of the next phase. We're going to workshop that with town staff, community focus group, and bring this back to the public open house for your review and consideration, looking for feedback on the potential options that we would be developing. Again, at that point, it's just a bunch of options. We're not looking to influence one or the other. They're just a bunch of options, and we want people to provide input on those. We'll look to include that as part of a report, and then that report will inform the development of recommendations. And those recommendations will then, you know, be featured at an open house again, similar to this, included in a final report and presented to council for consideration. And then, provided council wishes us to move forward based on those recommendations, we would likely be looking to update and revise the town's official plan and zoning bylaw based on those recommendations.
Thanks so much, Greg. So certainly lots of future opportunities to get involved. We're really just at the beginning in the information gathering stage, and all of this input that we've received this evening, whether spoken or written in the Q&A, you'll see here under the fall 2022 box, you know, summarizing all the results from consultation and really putting all of that information that we've gathered over the past weeks and months in one place. And so, if there's anyone else who has a question they'd like to raise their hand, certainly happy to take that. I don't know if you know, Will or Greg, if there's any comments specifically that you've seen come in that you're able to address, but lots of great questions about, you know, understanding the local economy of tourism and overnight stays, whether it's hotels, short-term rentals, and the like. Again, we'll be sharing all of the research and the content that went into building this presentation through the future reports. So certainly more information to come there. Any other hands up from folks who are who've joined us this evening who may want to ask a question or share a comment? And if we haven't got to your question or comment yet, please let us know. We have lots coming in, and so apologies, but if we have missed something that you wanted to be sure we addressed, happy to be nudged. Okay, a couple hands coming in. Joe, why don't you go ahead? You should be able to unmute yourself.
Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Okay, I heard lots from both sides, which is great. You know, this is great for communication and great for being part of the community as well. If someone doesn't see me as part of the community, I am. I do own a short-term rental, and I do have a number of people that I hire throughout the entire year. Practically 4 individuals are hired by me by my single short-term rental. The short-term rental is not just for, you know, short-term, but it's also for me and my family as well. In the early 70s, I did grow up in Crystal Beach area. But I think when you take away short-term rentals and so forth, there are not just locals that come to short-term rentals. I have people from Nova Scotia, from British Columbia, from Calgary and so forth that rent for weeks on end. And to me, I think we do bring something to the table, and as a community as well. I'm practically there almost a month, every month. I do support local communities, and if there's a charity, I help out as much as I can as well. So someone to tell me that I don't do that is disheartening as well. You know, it would be great if you can do a study that relates not just the qualitative items about it, but the quantitative as well, looking at the history of Crystal Beach as a destination spot, as it was in the past, and it still is today. So I hope, you know, during the whole sort of session and so forth, you know, there was one gentleman, Dan Silver, who said something about grandfathering. You know, I'm in support of that. We do bring tourism to the area, and we do also review every client that we have, and that's to respect my neighbors. My neighbors do know about my short-term rental space. They do know about how we review individuals that come to my house and my home. We're prone to only having families, and families that, you know, bring their kids a weekend away or so forth, right? So for me, I think there's a lot that Airbnbs do or short-term rentals do for the community. I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe, and for your comments and for participating in this evening's public open house. The next person with a hand up is Janet, and Janet, you should be able to go ahead.
Thank you. I just wanted to say that my husband and I own a beautiful little cottage in a residential area. We use it ourselves, but we would love the opportunity to be able to rent it out when we're not using it and share it with other people. Because one, it would help to offset some of our expenses until we retire. We would love to retire to this community, but it's going to be a few years down the road, and it just helps us get there. You know, it's tight. Everywhere is tight. So it just would help us realize a dream. The other thing is, because it is our place, you know, there's a lot of incentive for us to be very responsible as we rent it out to other family members. We know our neighbors. And even though we're not there all the time, we're very friendly with our neighbors, go for walks with our neighbors, share a cup of tea, share a, you know, cup of sugar kind of neighbors. So even though we're not permanent residents, that, you know, I don't feel like our neighborhood is hollow because we're not there all the time, because when we are there, we get together for coffee and things like that. So one of the other callers also mentioned about being a taxpayer. As a property owner, we also contribute to the community as through taxes and that kind of thing as well. So I think there's, you know, really two sides, and it's almost like, you know, maybe this approach should be approached on an individual basis. That, you know, what kind of property is it? What kind of, you know, is it a property that is going to allow big parties and multiple, you know, rooms and And I can understand if there was party after party and loads of people, but if it's a small family oriented and the neighbors are okay with it, I think it should be approved and allowed, even though it is in a residential area. And, Crystal Beach is a beautiful community. And like the other person was stating, I like to go into other communities and rent Airbnbs or short-term rentals and enjoy their community and travel the world that way. So I think we need to, we can't stay still. We have to be progressive, but we should do it with a plan, and we should always try to be respectful and that kind of thing and look at it from all points of view. So I guess that's my opinion. I hope that all short-term rental owners are respectful. And I just had one more comment about the whole commercial. If short-term rentals are considered commercial because they make money, then why aren't longer-term rentals, where you're renting to a family 12 months of the year, that's still making money from that home? So I believe the definition of commercial when it comes to rental is like a 5-unit apartment building or more. So I feel like as long as it's not disturbing the neighbors, and surely there should be something put in place if it does, then it should be, let's invite people into our community and let's let other people enjoy it too. That's just my 2 cents worth. Thank you.
Thanks for sharing your thoughts and comments with us this evening, Janet, and for joining the public open house this evening. So I'm not seeing any other hands up, and so we've, as I've mentioned before, we've received a lot of great comments, a lot of great feedback, a lot of great fodder on the Q&A tool. And as I mentioned before, we'll be saving that, downloading all of that, putting it into a table and reporting back on it to the community as the project evolves through next steps. And so you will see that again, and we will be taking a detailed look at all of those, all of that discussion that's happened, and understanding what the different opinions are as we embark on this land use process. So we'll give everyone sort of a last call if you'd like to raise your hand and speak. Otherwise, we can, Will, if you want to just keep it on the next step slide, we can do that last call. And then certainly if folks need to step away, and certainly respecting your time, we will slowly wrap up our open house this evening if there's no other hands up. So perhaps a last call to put up your hand, or if you had a very specific question that we didn't get to in the Q&A, certainly feel free to flag it. Okay, well, really appreciate everyone taking the time out of their busy schedules and their evening to join us, whether here on Zoom or watching the live stream. And for all of the feedback, comments, questions, and discussion that was had around this topic as we embark on this study. Chris, not to put you on the spot, is there anything you wanted to say before we wrap up and from the town?
No, I again echo everybody's time is appreciated, their contributions appreciated. We have quite a bit of information in the Q&A boxes for us to take in, chart up and digest and respond. But thank you is really it. I heard a lot of good stuff.
Well, thanks so much, Chris. Thank you to everyone who is attending this evening. And that does wrap up our open house. So have a good rest of your evening, and perhaps see you at the next one. Take care, everyone. So I think for the town, to wrap up the meeting, I don't think we're able to stay. I think it just needs to be ended, and then and that'll end the meeting.
Yeah, I've just been trying to reach IT at the moment, just to
okay,
stop YouTube's feed. So
no worries.